The leadership of the Nigerian Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress has continued to come under severe attacks after it reneged on its promise to ensure the total reversal of tariff increases in electricity and fuel price hike. Various interest groups, civil society organizations, and Nigerians at large have taken a swipe at the leadership of the organized labor for suspending its planned nationwide industrial action for 2 weeks. The widely publicized protests had got infuriated citizens mobilized for result-oriented action until the negotiation team of the NLC and the TUC made a bold-face after Sunday night's consultation with the federal government-led team that reportedly agreed to the temporary suspension of electricity tariff hike, but retained the controversial market-driven pump price of fuel. While the Labour compromise has been tagged as a betrayal by a cross-section of Nigerians, others have said the accord between Labour and the ruling government has continued to change Nigerians. With us to discuss these and other issues is Professor Sylvester Odion Akhaine, Professor of Political Science from the Department of Political Science, Lagos State University. It's a pleasure having you on SaharaTV, Prof.
Thank you.
Prof, let's get your initial reactions to the compromise of Labour with regards to the suspension of the nationwide industrial actions.
I think the point to make is that it was disappointing because Nigeria, no matter what you say, has a very rich history of resistance. And it was surprising that the Labour Center that ought to understand the issues that are involved in subsidy matter, increment in tariffs, behaved as though they were ignorant outright. They were ignorant outright. And I've never seen that kind of, demonstration of naivety. Demonstration of naivety, unparalleled naivety. Because the issues basically are the issues we confronted in the 1980s. Don't forget that the structural adjustment program was, I think introduced around July 1986, in this country. And we, of course, deconstructed the World Bank, IMF, in terms of their logic. It was illogical, to impose taxes on people, to ask people to tighten their bet, I mean, we've done with those issues. Subsidy does not exist. It's a mythical category, up to the time from General Yakubu Gowon. Don't forget that Nigeria moved from agriculture being the mainstay of the economy, to oil after the Civil War. And oil has financed virtually everything in this country. Elite consumerism. And the development of a few infrastructures that Unoli describe as artifacts of development. The same oil. So how do you finance, how do you subsidize, a product that is subsidizing every Nigerian, that is paying the country, that governors go to Abuja every month to share excess crude oil, accruals. So, I mean, this is simple logic. And it's unfortunate that even the man who is the current president of the country said that oil subsidy was a fraud a few years back here. I mean, what do they take Nigerians for? Do they take us as idiots? And if the man lacks the political will to do the needful, the refineries will never work, because not that the refineries are really bad, because they have been sabotaged, by those social forces that have continued, to act as leeches on the wealth of our people, on the wealth of this country. That is basically it. So these people ought to know that subsidy does not exist. It does not exist anywhere. And if you follow the so-called price, the elementary principle of economics, supply and demand, when the demand for oil was very low during the COVID-19 period, when it was, in this peak, Nigeria never reduced price commensurate with international price. We never did. Now, all of a sudden, because they've gone to take IMF facilities, and they have now started again implementing conditionalities. And we thought we were in a post Washington consensus period, and that Nigeria ought to be more self-sufficient than it has always been, particularly after the bailout from the Paris, club debt in 2006. Here we are. This government has taken Nigeria into the debt loop within a short period of time that a generation after him might not be able to pay. So there are options to IMF.
Now, before we go into the options, Prof, I mean, based on your arguments, Nigerian masses and Labour in the past have argued that a fuel subsidy does not exist, and you have reiterated it now. I mean, what exactly is Nigeria subsidizing with regards to fuel? Even the president has Buhari at a point in time said that a fuel subsidy does not exist. I mean, I have said this publicly on many occasions. Now, if this is the case, sir, how did the IMF come about the idea of a fuel subsidy that must be eliminated with fuel price hikes?
The IMF, the development set, as we call them, have different model of dealing with debtor nations, countries that come to beg. They have conditions they normally give to them. IMF, of course, does not have the interest of countries that are borrowing at heart, and IMF does not also have confidence in the ability of these third world countries to pay. And so what they call subsidy is actually a direct tax, or maybe you call it indirect tax. Indirect tax to be able to service the indebtedness. Don't forget, Nigeria is almost using close to about 50% of its, if not more than 50, between 50 and 60% for debt servicing. And so when you collect more money from people, indirect tax, they'll be able to meet those debt servicing obligations. That is basically what it is. It has never gone beyond that. The IMF logic is illogical. It's illogical, and that is why they remain patrons of poverty.
Now, based on the details, of the agreement signed with the federal government, has Labour, once again sold out cheaply, and we'd like to get to why is it not that the federal government has refused to address the fundamental issues which necessitated this strike in the first instance?
Well, I think that the Labour outing is the height of infamy. That's the way to put it. They didn't go into negotiation as people who understand even the basics of struggle. Workers struggle all over the world, based on two options. One of the major options that they have taken within the context of the neoliberal, paradigm globally is what we call workerism. Asking for increment in your salaries when the economy is in a decline, when there is inflation, when the means of living is too high, cost of living is too high. You ask for wage increment. That is what workers have done all over the world. But the second option, which is not even on the agenda in Nigeria, is to seize power. Seize political power, because the workers are supposed to be more in strength, in number. Seize power. So they have never organized for seizure of political power in the country. But one would expect that when a labor unit, or center is going into negotiation with government, you begin with your strike as your negotiating tool. So when they meet you halfway, you can begin to review your strike. And that is, as ASU has demonstrated, that mode of negotiation, perfectly well. And it was surprising to see, the so-called labor leaders laughing it out. Only God knows whether they have been settled, at the meeting they had with the government. But let me point out one danger. The danger we are entering into in this country is that we are seeing a situation where labor will now be fused into partnership with the government. In political science, we call that corporatism, and it will be dangerous for civil society. And so we might begin to sing the funeral of freedom in Nigeria.
Now, Prof, many Nigerians do not seem to support this unsustainable so-called subsidy regime. And it is clear that Nigeria's hopeless dependence on fuel importation will keep the nation in a vicious cycle of endless price hike. Now, has the government offered any tangible roadmap to end dependency on fuel importation?
No, they don't have. This government is not capable of transforming the Nigerian economy. It lacks the capacity to do so. It lacks the political will to do so, because the government of the day is pursuing a separatist and a sectarian agenda. A sectarian agenda in all of its policy. So it's not here to solve Nigerian problem. Here is a government that is reportedly building refinery in Katsina to source crude oil from Niger, a neighboring country, when Nigeria has crude, that we have not, exhausted. When we have refineries that are not working. Now, why has it become impossible to build new refineries? Assuming the old ones have been sabotaged, by enemies of Nigeria. They have been sabotaged. Why is it impossible to build new refineries? Now, I remember the Guardian editorial board at one point argued that even our people in the Niger Delta who are refining oil, I mean, a 100-level chemical engineering student will tell you that to refine oil, to refine petrol is the easiest thing to do. Our people in the Niger Delta who did not go to university, they refine petrol. They refine petrol, but these guys, the entire Nigerian security network, they go to the Delta and destroy those things. They destroy them and say they are so-called uncovering illegal bunkering, illegal refineries. That is the irony of this country. We said, why not turn those people into cooperatives? Give them crude. Over time, their refining method will become more refined, to reduce environmental pollution. Meanwhile, petrol will be surplus, will be surplus in those areas, so that the pressure about importing refined fuel, does not arise at all. But these elements, these people in government who have lost touch with reality, who have no dream, for Nigeria's future, have abandoned all of these options. There was a time about 14 licenses were given to some individuals or companies, private individuals or private concerns, to build about 14 modular refineries. What has happened to that process? Everything has been sabotaged. So what kind of country, do we have? You have petrol. You cannot refine. You go to outside of the country to import, refined petrol into your country. I think Nigeria is perhaps the only OPEC country that does that. It is a shame.
Organized labor lamely was said to have lamely accepted the argument that price should be hiked, in addition to the token of 133 buses to serve as palliatives. Will 133 buses really cushion the multiplier effects of the hike?
I think the labor leaders who negotiated need to be sent to the Sanatorium. The reason is this. In the 1980s, Babangida, while implementing conditionalities of the structural adjustment program, gave labor bosses to the Nigerian Labour Congress as palliative, set up the People's Bank, in this country. What has happened to those so-called palliative or safety nets for the society? So that's why, they've lost touch with reality. 133 buses cannot serve a population estimated to be about 200 million. It cannot. It is just like, how do I put it? It's like making jest of them. Making jest of them. Now we have NEPA tariff, has been hacked.
I was actually coming to that. Prof, I was actually coming
okay.
Because Labour also was said to have fell flatly for the government's gimmick of a 2-week suspension of electricity tariffs, which are already being collected by the electricity distribution companies.
Yes.
Does Labour even have a mechanism to verify compliance with this phony directive?
Well, I think the truth is that the leadership that went into negotiation, for me, are bereft of ideas. Now, what 2 weeks suspension, as you said, this process is already being implemented. People are being given estimated billings everywhere, more than what they consume. And so we can in fact say that there has been a regime, of a perpetual hike in electricity tariff, because when you give estimated billings, they don't reflect, the actual consumption of consumers. And so Nigerians have been fleeced ab initio, and they will continue to fleece them, with their so-called hikes. And when you look at the ownership in the electricity sector, who are the people? Former head of states are the owners of these so-called GENCOs and DISCOs. So who are they deceiving? So the state elites, both the incumbent and those out of power, are collaborating, to impoverish Nigerians. That is basically what it is. If they think that at the end of 2 weeks, the government will go back, they must be jokers to have fallen to that bait.
Now, the federal government had increased electricity tariff by about 100% earlier. And we're also looking at the issue of VAT and the stamp duty charge, which has also been increased earlier. Exchange rates have continued to go up, forcing the naira value of imported commodities to increase. Unemployment and unemployment rates have doubled due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the poverty rate in the country has increased. Where does this end?
Well, I think that many people say that Nigeria is always lucky, because when it goes to the precipice, and it has a way of getting off the brink. But what I will tell you, Nigeria will not be lucky all the time, because those of us who are speaking are reasonable. We can articulate the issues, what they are. The younger generation that I refer to as Coca-Cola generation, they have only one way. The way they will react to this crisis might beat the imagination of the Nigerian state and their apparatuses. Let me remind them that at the point of 9/11 in 2001, what a renowned British historian, Husband, I think Eric Husband, warned that the wars of the 21st century will not be fought by conventional army. And these people seem to ignore these things. The youth that you have today are more sophisticated than the Nigerian army. And when they react against the Nigerian state, it will be devastating. Let them say nobody wants them. Governance is for the people and not for spirit, not for ghosts. They must, invest in our people. They must take, the destiny of our country, as utmost, not satisfying the conditionalities of IMF. And these people don't even know that the continent stands, to be recolonized. Recolonized, even in the maybe they want to be what they call house Negro in the recolonized continent. They want to be house Negro. These idiots who are running the country currently. That is probably what a future that they want. We don't want that future. We want Africa to be liberated.